Welcome to the Strategy Mob Podcast. Tune in for everything you need to know to stay in the know regarding the automotive industry. Here's your host, Jason Harris.
Hey, what's going on, Podcast Nation? It is Jason Harris here, and thank you for joining me on another episode of Strategy Mob. Today, I have an exciting guest. I'm looking forward to this because he's from the part of the country that I'm originally from, so that's going to be fun. I have Steve Stauning with me today. Steve, thank you so much for taking the time to jam with me.
Thanks, Jason. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
You know, a lot of people are always surprised to find out that I am not a Canadian. In fact, most of the times when I speak at events in the States, they introduce me as the Canadian. And then when I speak at events in Canada, they introduce me as the Americans. I have no idea what I am, but I am an Idahoan through and through. And so it's fun. It's fun to jam with you, Steve. And I know we're going to have some great conversations. But to kind of start off today's podcast, I thought it'd be really cool to kick it off with like an origin story. I always find it really interesting to hear kind of how people got started and ended up where they are. I don't think anybody ever kind of wakes up and goes, "Yeah, this is what I'm going to do." Right? So Steve, I love to hear it. Now, how did you get started doing what you're doing?
So right now I do training and consulting for dealers, for dealer groups, OEMs, and mostly automotive industry vendors. And I think like most people who do what I do, it was kind of accidental. I was the e-commerce director for the Asbury Automotive Group. They're a publicly traded group here in the States. And I left there at the end of September 2009, beginning of October. And to just kind of strike out on my own. And I had already, in that role as e-commerce director, even though I reported to the CEO, it was strange. We were very decentralized. And so our 90 general managers really made the decisions for their store, even, something as complicated as digital marketing. And if you think back to 2009, how little we kind of knew about it. And so I had to act as a consultant for those 90 general managers. I couldn't come in and say, you're going to get rid of Auto Trader, or you're going to spend this money on Google or whatever. And so that kind of prepped me for what I started doing when I left, which is, coming into dealerships and dealer groups and working with OEMs on strategy, but not doing it like a bull in a china shop or somebody with a high title, but rather, coaxing, cajoling, consulting with them to help them get where they needed to be. And it worked out really well right from the beginning. And if you think about the end of 2009, we were in the middle of a recession. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a weird time to go out on your own, but
that's true.
But also if you think about it, dealers were struggling, right? And so I was able to offer some value pretty quickly to my clients.
I went through the recession in 2008, 2009, and that's actually what ultimately kind of brought me up here to Canada. And it was definitely an interesting time to break out and start doing something on your own. And, this is one of those industries that once it kind of gets into your blood, it's really kind of hard to get it out. So it doesn't surprise me that people that have great success within kind of the day-to-day operations of a dealership end up breaking out, thinking they might do something, but then ultimately just kind of get sucked back in the form of some type of consulting or training or coaching. And I love talking to people like that. And we had a chance to kind of jam a little bit before we started today's recording. And I think you're dealing with a lot of the same situations or dealer conversations as I'm dealing with right now. And it's preparing for this new year. And there's just so much uncertainty. There are some cases where we have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, just to kind of get our year started. So I'd kind of love to hear from the conversations you've been having and where you are right now. How has that planning for the unknown going?
That is the biggest challenge for dealers right now. And if we think about traditionally automotive dealers, it has always been a month-to-month proposition for dealers. There's very little, 1-year planning and absolutely zero 5-year planning for most dealerships. Mm-hmm. But when times are good, that sort of seat of the pants leadership it actually works because dealers do a great job of taking advantage of what's in front of them. And I don't mean taking advantage in the bad way. I mean taking advantage of all opportunities.
Sure. Of course.
And so, when we think about when COVID really first started to hit, end of March, mid-March, end of March, I can speak for my clients. They were having a record year, and then all of a sudden, oh my gosh, some of them were actually closed down for a month or more. Others had a lot of restrictions put on them depending on where they were in the country, what locale they were in. But when the customers started coming back, when the prospects started walking back in and inventories were tight, dealers were very quick to take advantage of that. They made great grosses right away. They weren't married to the discount pricing that they had in February. They very quickly pivoted. And so
doesn't it kind of remind you a little bit of like 2009, 2010? Like, remember the Cash for Clunker program? We'd come right into it, and it was like, I hate to say it was like shooting fish in a barrel.
Truly. If you look at, and depending on the location, some dealers, it started in May, some it started in June, some it started in July, but it started for everybody, and it was a flood. And your analogy of shooting fish in a barrel is correct. Interesting about the 2008, 2009 recession, to talk about the resilience of car dealers, if you think about it, any other industry that saw that sort of decline in retail sales, half of the retail locations would be closed, right? So if it's clothing stores or whatever, and there was no government assistance for dealers. There was for some OEMs back then, but none for dealers. And yet, except for the consolidation that had already kind of started, Chrysler consolidating a lot, GM. We really didn't lose a lot of dealership locations. They're very resilient. The variable pay plan helps, but the fact is that dealers made those quick pivots back then, and they made them, through COVID. The challenge is how to do that going forward, because as we see from the October and November results compared to 2019, this wave is flattening in some markets.
We have this kind of like on off kind of environment right now, and that's not. It's like we're okay if we're off, right? And we know to kind of how to batten down the hatches and ride out those cold winter months or the storm or something like that, and then we kind of know we come back out of it, right? But this constant back and forth of being on and being off, either because the government's saying you so, telling you so, or you have cars or you don't have cars, and one dealership, they had cars last month. They had a great month. This month they have no cars.
Right.
So that's a great place. That's going to become my question for you, is like your kind of thoughts, your opinions, how do we prepare our operations for this kind of on off, environment that we're in right now?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and it's really boring, but it is being married to your processes. It's having great processes that, one, take advantage of the moment, right? What's in front of us, but also, continue to work towards the future. So something silly like getting every up in the CRM, something as silly as that. When times are great, it's very easy to just, that guy's a tire kicker and we don't need to put him in the CRM. Let's move on. The problem is when times are flat or down, which for some dealers, November was down, Ford was down as an OEM, for example. When you don't put it up in the CRM, we lose all ability to do all those other processes, be-back processes, marketing to that person. Let's say they came in to look at a 2020 Escape and, they didn't buy in October, but we didn't put them in the CRM. And then the 2021s come out and we've got this special cash or whatever. We can't market to them inexpensively. And so that's really, I think, the challenge for dealers. It's, I'm not the first to say it, but, bad habits are learned in good times. And as you say, the on again, off again. So what we've had these good times and then bad times and good times and bad times. And it might be a week or a day or whatever. And the problem is that, we got those bad habits for a month. And then then the market slowed a little bit and we couldn't pivot to get back into good habits. We just took advantage of what was in front of us. There was just less in front of us. Right.
No, it's totally true. You know what I call it, and I've said it a lot in this podcast, probably people get tired of me saying it, but I call it full belly syndrome, where, as an industry, when things are down, we have a tendency of talking a lot about what could we have done to do better, right? And when things are good, we seem to just not talk about that at all, and we just want to focus on patting ourselves on the back and how amazing we are, and so on and so forth. But like you saw this coming out of the recession probably the same way I saw it, right? Look, and we'll see it this time too. I know for sure. Look, good operators, that cream rises to the top. And you probably have already seen it in a few cases, and I'll probably ask you a little bit about that as well. But the ones that are really going to succeed here are the ones that are going to commit to executing a process that is more customer centric, and maybe making adjustments to that process so that they can increase their customer confidence in doing business with them, instead of just kind of relying on the fact of, once the shipment of new trucks come in, we'll sell them all, so who cares, right? It's like, I remember coming out of the recession, it was all about processing our way to profitability. And I see the same thing happening right now, but as an industry, or when you're talking to a dealer, like, how do we change that mindset so that they start thinking that way, start talking about what they should have done versus what they already did?
And I think the pandemic helped because a lot of dealers were forced to create better experiences, shorter time in the dealership. The number one complaint for consumers for decades has been how long it takes to buy a car. And most of that was required back, I started in 85. Most of that was required in 85. You had to do fairly long needs analysis, fairly extensive qualification process. You had to do a pretty solid feature presentation and, a big product selection, and really find the right vehicle, the relevant vehicle for them at the right value, build that value throughout. And today, consumers have been doing that on their own. They've been doing it, some of them for a very long time, because so much information is available before I come into the dealership. But getting an old school desk manager to understand that, it was a little tough. With the pandemic, we were forced to limit contact with consumers. And so now the deals that used to take 4 hours in a dealership are taking 2. And deals that used to take 3 are taking, an hour and 15 minutes. And we're getting things done more efficiently. My hope for dealers is moving out of this, that we don't go back to slowing down the process on purpose. I'm hearing reports of the backup at F&I on a Saturday at dealerships that aren't really doing that well anyway. And it doesn't make any sense, because F&I has become so easy with the tools that are out there. That's
a great point. I mean, talk about just some unneeded control, right? Like, both me and you have been in the business long enough to know that's how I got trained. I had to maintain control. I had to control the customer, control the sell. I can't tell you how many times I remember my sales manager, I'd go in there, maybe be venting about a customer or something like that, and they look me straight in the face and, Jason, go take control. You need to control that customer. And it's like today, I feel like if I was to tell somebody to do that, they look at me and go, "You okay? Like, you feeling all right?" But I know I give our industry some hard time. I call it tough love, right? I give them some crap at times. But to your point, I have to admit, the amount of change as an industry that we did in the last 9 months is actually pretty damn impressive. Like, collectively, we've stepped up and are communicating with customers in ways that we always said we were never going to.
Okay, yeah. So, and let me. So you've got these sacred cows like F&I that we're finding that if it's a trained F&I killer, they're getting 3,000 in the back, depending on the manufacturer. But let's say you're a Ford dealer and you're getting an average $800 or $900 or $1,200 on the back. When you let the customer do their own F&I, with an iPad, your back end grosses, the average is higher. It's not trained killer level, but it's higher. And dealers were already starting to discover that pre-COVID. During the pandemic, they were sort of forced to do that. And then on a side note, along those lines, I actually know one group that is very seriously working towards getting rid of service advisors and having the customer communicate directly with the technician. And that's blasphemy, right? Oh my gosh, you can't do that. I've tried to toy with the idea of taking some service advisors off of commission. And oh my gosh, what'll happen to our ROs, right? Our dollars for RO is going to drop, and we find out that these things don't happen. This group, by the way, that's talking about that, and I have to keep it confidential. They went to their technicians and asked them their thoughts, and the technicians thought, that would be great. That would remove this huge bottleneck in getting in speaking with the consumer. So when you think about this whole consumer experience, it really is about taking an honest look at these sacred cows and deciding which ones really bring value to the dealership, and then secondly to the process and the buyer.
Oh no, 100%. I mean, look, we've been doing business the same way for a little over 100 years, and it's like,
and it works,
and it worked, and it worked.
Yeah.
Okay, the consumers, I think, expectation is like, look, they're excited actually to leave the house. They're excited. They want to go do something, but they don't want the same old experience. I'm having, some dealerships where I work with right now having amazing success with getting their customers to fill out the finance application and review some of the additional extended warranty or protection options before they even come in for the test drive. Like they're getting that conversation, already started, so that the application gets started, or at least the seeds get planted, so that when it comes in, it's not this big smack across the face that we're going to sell you something in addition to it. And then they're desking the deals with the protection in there because the conversation's already kind of had, so it's mixing it up. When I had my dealership, I was criticized for the fact that I had a 4-day on, 3-day off work week. Because I was on a row of dealerships. I had a Mitsubishi dealership, and there was Honda across the street, Toyota across the street, and I actually had a GM call me and go, it's not cool what you're doing over there. You're actually pissing my staff off because they want it, and I don't understand how you're doing it. I'm like, well, look, we got to have bigger conversations, right? And for me, it was, look, I was a Mitsubishi dealership. You know how difficult it can be to attract really, really high-end talent to come work in a Mitsubishi dealership? Not the easiest way to do it. So it wasn't going to be through pay. I didn't have the money to do it, So I had to find another hack, and for me, it was family life balance. Being able to offer, some incredibly talented salespeople to come work for me and only work 4 days on and 3 days off. I had a list of people willing to sign up for that deal, right? But then it was having those conversations, and how we were going to process our way to more profitability. And I feel dealers need to have these they should have been having the conversations years ago,
right?
But I feel, to your point, if there's a silver lining in this pandemic, that is kind of the silver lining. And I hate to say that there is, but it is kind of the silver lining for industry, is that we're now having those real conversations. And my curiosity, my next question, I think, for you is, how do we get our managers to start having those conversations? Because that's not typically something that they do.
Well, obviously there's the job security in not having that conversation.
Exactly.
And so that's really the tough part. But I think we've learned so much. Dealers have learned so much through this pandemic, not just from a customer experience standpoint, but also from, to your point, a staffing standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
I do know of dealers that are doing the 4-day work week now. I do know of dealers who have allowed their BDC to stay remote, or some of the agents to stay remote, or do a few days remote. Those quality of life things for the staff, that's a big piece of it. Another thing that would have been blasphemy prior to COVID is that we can sell more vehicles with fewer people. So these stores that used to just flood the floor, and they constantly had that bottom 50%, turning over, and their managers were tied up with nothing but recruiting and hiring. They found that during COVID, they could sell more vehicles with fewer people, and they just needed to staff it right?
For sure.
Instead of the typical A/B, team A, team B, and having this overlap on some days, and then we're stretched thin on other days. They realized, what, we can actually staff kind of like a restaurant would, if you think about it. A restaurant doesn't have everybody come in at 9 a.m. when they open at 11, right? Mm-hmm. They stagger the staff throughout the day. So people are thinking about it differently. And I think that's the biggest piece. It is a silver lining in all this.
Well, the cool thing is because we're forced to do it. I sit down with a lot of dealerships, consulting with them on their goals and objectives. And it's interesting when we take a goal, and instead of using the language goal, but we turn it into a mandate. How much we're willing to change everything because there is no other option. For
Right.
example, like at my Mitsubishi dealership, I had to close at 45%. Right? If I was going to cover my monthly nut, all right, that was it. I only had so many bodies coming in. My marketing efforts was only going to bring in so many things. Like there wasn't an option. So it's crazy when you get kind of put into a corner like that, and you realize that there's not an option, and then you have to reverse engineer backwards to adjust your process so that you can fulfill what the mandate is, not what the goal is. Um, the thing I find interesting though is that still even today we do this kind of horrible job of measuring the effectiveness of our processes. Do you see this too? Like we'll go as far as like documenting a process and putting it out there, and then we just kind of like feel like we're done.
There are certainly dealers that do that, and but the ones growing share, whether it's an up market or down market, the ones that have lower turnover, happier teams, they don't have those issues because they do. You can't have process without measurement, and so they do rely on those measurements to make continuous process improvement, to kick out pieces of the process that aren't working, to determine where someone needs particular help, right? I used to use the example of two 10-car salespeople. At the end of the month, we talk to each of those two salespeople the exact same way in most dealerships, right?
That's true.
But if we look at the data, we might see that one of the 10-car salespeople had 50 opportunities and the other had 20. If we knew that, the conversations would be different, wouldn't they? Right? I mean, the one with 50 is burning through our opportunities.
Yep.
The one with 20, we need to put them in front of more people. We need to find ways to get more warm butts in seats in front of that person. So while it feels like dealers don't use data, there's a number that do, and that's
those are the ones who are going to be successful.
When we think about conferences and the dealers that are on the cover of the different magazines and all of this stuff, the ones that are really doing a great job, they're not telling anybody. I mean, the guys in their 20 group, the gals in their 20 group probably know what's going on at that dealership, but they're not, when we had conferences, they're not, standing on the stage, touting, what they've been doing. They're doing it secretly and they're taking share without others knowing it. And, all of a sudden the dealer across town is thinking, gosh, what's that guy doing? Right. Oh, he must be the whore on price or whatever. And it's not the case. They're just beating you with solid processes and a really happy team that is really productive throughout the day.
You're so right. Solid processes really do generate a happy team. Like I actually been asked that question, like, how do I make my team happy? And I remember sitting in a meeting one time and this HR manager speaks up and he's like, benefits. Like, okay. And then someone else said time off. And, another one said increase in pay. And, I'm just sitting there, just kind of biting my tongue. And I'm like, no, like structure.
Yeah.
Like, staff want structure. They want to know what they're getting themselves into every day. And when there's a clearly documented, defined structure to the process, then they feel like they can accomplish that process and they walk away feeling accomplished. Do you see the same thing?
I absolutely. And I try to explain it to desk managers. They're not really a scapegoat here, but oftentimes the desk managers are also the sales manager who is in charge of a team. And those people, he or she is responsible for their success. And the way that I explain it to them about structure and about direction and about processes is I ask them, would you be happier if you knew exactly what your boss wanted out of you, whether that's the GM or the owner? Would you be would you be happier? Would you be more productive? Would you, be more successful? Oh my gosh, I sure would. Boy, if I just knew, what they really wanted. And it's the exact same thing for your people. Great people want that and good people need that. And when you don't provide that, and we can use all sorts of terms for it, structure, process, rules, direction, whatever, they all mean the same thing. And that is, I need to know what's expected of me. And as long as you tell me what's expected of me and then you help me get there, I'm going to be really successful. And I'm not going to leave. Why would I leave? Right? I'm successful here.
No, that's so true. I think a lot of dealers right now are thinking about those staff. And I think that from two perspectives is how do we retain the staff? But also here's the tough one, I think, for a lot of people is how do we attract new talent? And that's always been a bit of a challenge for us in the past. I think right now, even more so of a challenge, because there's just so much uncertainty. I mean, I have a GM right now that's, going next month, I'm not going to have any trucks to sell, which represents 65% of my business. Do I keep those guys employed out there? Do I lay them off for a month and then bring them back the following month? For all the dealers out there right now that are staring down that barrel of needing to attract new talent into their dealership, what kind of advice would you give them, Steve?
Well, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And if you think about the last, 50 years in automotive, it's been, I just need some good people. I just need some good people. When I speak to 20 groups and I stay for the discussions that the dealer principals have, they're always one used car manager away from really getting it right with used cars. And if you attend the same 20 group for 3 sessions in a row, the first one of the year in March, the dealer principal saying, I got to get a new used car. I got to get a new used car manager. I got to replace my used car manager. Second meeting, 4 months later, he's talking about, I got this great guy. He's terrific. He's killing it. He's crushing it. I finally got the perfect used car manager. And then fast forward to the meeting in the fall or winter, and guess what he's looking for? A used car manager.
Yep.
And so the problem is not attracting people. The problem is we still treat people the way we did in the 80s and 90s. And that is, we threw them all into the deep end of the pool, and the ones that swam, they were cut out for the car business. And the ones that don't, well, they just weren't cut out. The pool of talent has shrunk. Fewer people are willing to work. Fewer 18, 22-year-olds, or fewer of them are willing to work for a car dealership.
For sure.
And so it's not sink or swim. We're way beyond that. And so it's not about attracting good people. It's about making the most of the people that you have, getting the most out of them, making your underperformers average and getting your average performers to be great. And that requires some leadership. That requires this weird concept that we've bandied about in automotive forever. But it's the problem for most managers in automotive, and it's I feel bad because their problem is that nobody helped them succeed. They were one of the ones that swam. And so a lot of them never had an example of great leadership, of someone who really cared about them, who understood that his success or her success was not their own. It was because of the team, and that the only way that they were going to reach their goals was to make sure that every salesperson who worked for them maximized the opportunities, whether it's the opportunities in the CRM or the opportunities that walk on the lot, that they maximized, their time in the dealership to be productive and effective. It's why I wrote my last book, the Ridiculously Simple Sales Management.
No, which is a great book, by the way. Anybody watching, listening, need to go check that out. I know it's getting towards the tail end of our time today, but you're so right. Having that retention strategy with staff, you know what I mean? Like we will talk till our faces are blue about retention of our customers, and then we might shave off like 5 or 7 minutes to talk about how we're going to retain and develop our staff. I do think there's some amazing talent out there. But to your point, the first manager I had was very much so suck it up, buttercup. That was just the way he was. And that's just the way that he managed. He just didn't know any better. And, this is funny. I say this, and of course my operations manager will give me a hard time, being a marketing agency, is I would actually like to see less money being spent on the acquisition of new customers and more money being spent in the investment of our people, because happy people do make for more profitable dealerships. I've seen it. I've seen it 100 times over, and I'm sure you have as well. But Steve, before I let you go today, for everyone that's been listening to our conversation or watching our conversation and just really loving the way we're jamming right now, but would love to connect with you and kind of follow along with you and your journey, what is the best way to do so?
Well, you can come to my primary website, stevestauning.com, but also I'm fortunately or unfortunately the only Steve Stauning in the world. So you can just Google me and you'll find my LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with you on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with you on Facebook, Twitter, any of the social networks. All of my I create some video training. It's all 100% free. So I have hours and hours of video training on stevestauning.com, mostly appointment setting and overcoming objections, but there's also some leadership pieces in there as well. And but you can find me easily on the web. So just look for Steve Stauning.
That's awesome. Hey, Steve, thank you so much for taking the time to jam with me today. This has been a blast. You have yourself an amazing day.
Thank you, Jason. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the Strategy Mob podcast with your host, Jason Harris. Don't want to miss new content? Be sure to sign up to Be a Mobster at strategymob.com to stay in the know. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe.